home to approximately 20 million people, is the largest city in the Arabic-speaking world, with one of the highest population densities. More than 250,000 inhabitants live in a single square kilometer in some of its streets. Almost 1 in 4 Egyptians lives in the enormous capital of Egypt. It is a vast city of excesses, dominated by concrete, traffic, pollution and crowds. But it is also a great repository of many cultures. It is here you can find stunning mosques, churches and synagogues, important universities, bustling streets, vibrant popular culture, and echoes of a fascinating past. Its origins stretch back far in time, with ancient settlements before the Christian era. But the name Cairo was first mentioned in history more than 1,000 years ago, when the rulers of the Fatimid dynasty chose this place to establish the capital of its empire. And they called it Al-Qahira, the victorious. Since then, Al-Qahira has honored its name, having survived invasions, bombings, plagues, famines, and incredible calamities. And yet ultimately, it has always been victorious. The extraordinary history of Cairo dates back to the end of the 10th century, when a new caliphate dynasty burst onto the scene that would seize Egypt from the Abbasid caliphs of Baghdad. This new dynasty, the Fatimids, were descended from the Prophet Muhammad through his daughter Fatima. They had arisen from a group of Shiite believers persecuted by the Abbasid rulers in Baghdad, led by the Ismaili Imam, Abdallah al-Mahdi Billah. Al-Mahdi had fled and taken refuge in Sijil Massa, in present-day Morocco, from where he launched a force that would attract followers over the years and establish the Fatimid Caliphate in Ifriqiya, today's Tunisia. His successors would eventually extend their conquests to Sicily, Syria and the Red Sea. In 969, they also conquered the prosperous city of Al-Fustat, founded 3 centuries earlier as a settlement by the first Arab troops that had conquered Egypt from the Christians. This military camp had gradually expanded thanks to its geographical location at the gateway to the delta of the world's longest river. The new Fatimid lords took control of Al-Fustat, but they decided to establish the court outside town, so they founded a royal site located a few miles north, Al-Qahira. This new walled urban complex measured around 1.5 square kilometers and would soon become an exclusive area containing palaces, mosques, madrasas, baths, fountains and private gardens. Archaeologists have uncovered many examples of the urban layout of this early Cairo.
We found next to the Ayyubid wall, we found this beautiful Fatimid wall made of mud brick. And we were lucky enough to find 2 kinds of Fatimid structures. We found a Fatimid mausoleum with a fountain and a garden from the end of the 10th century. So basically almost from the time when the Fatimids came from Tunisia to Egypt. And then we found this Fatimid fortification made of mud brick from the end of the 11th century, from the time of this very famous vizier Badr al-Jamali.
Only a few remains of the original Fatimid walls exist, but these are magnificent examples, such as the South Gate, Bab Zuwayla, which can be recognized by the colossal minarets of the adjacent mosque of Al-Muayyad. Zuwayla was the name of one of the many North African Berber tribes that formed the Fatimid armies in their conquest of northern Egypt. The gate was renowned over the centuries for hanging the heads of criminals there for public scorn. A street some 1.5 kilometers long crosses all medieval Cairo between this gate located to the south side of the walls and the north gate, and it bears the name of the conqueror of Egypt and founder of the city, the Caliph Al-Muiz. It is today an amazing boulevard. The north gate, Bab al-Futuh, still looks monumental, despite the low height of the entrance caused by the level of the street, which has progressively risen over the centuries. Over 200 years, the early heart of the court of Al-Qahira was transformed to incorporate a new population, with new palaces, houses and centers of worship. Egypt experienced a very high degree of prosperity, and both the new city of Cairo and the older city of Al-Fustat witnessed an extraordinary flowering of intellectual life, the arts, the sciences, and architecture. This can be seen in several magnificent buildings that have been preserved until this day, such as the Mosque of Al-Akmar, built in 1125, with its characteristic sculpted keel-shaped niche and central inscribed medallion, with the inscribed names of Muhammad and Ali.
They have magnificent stonework, a lot of it very unusual for Cairo in that it shows decorative motifs which aren't found on any other monuments. It also has a very unusual oratory that was built on top of the Muqattam cliffs, which has some magnificent stucco work, carved plaster. And in fact, there's another very similar one right behind me. And this too is one of the finest examples that we have of Fatimid stucco work. Now, there's a dichotomy in the way we have objects of art presented in a religious context in Islam, in which you almost never find figural images. But those which were made for a secular context, such as the palaces, are very frequently found with figural images, and many of these are found on the pottery. We have wonderful examples of people dressed in luxurious clothing. We have examples of genre scenes, scenes of everyday life, such as wrestlers competing in competitions. We have animals which have perhaps iconographic meanings associated with paradise, such as peacocks.
Several imposing mosques were erected, including that of Al-Hakim, dating back to the late 10th century, with its unique minarets that recall the ancient towers of the pharaonic temples. Or Egypt's most famous mosque, Al-Azhar, the Splendid. Its vast size, with 5 minarets and 6 entrances, means it can be seen from any part of the city. It is today a mix of constructions from different periods based around its original nave, supported by 300 marble columns with pre-Islamic period capitals and subjected to constant restoration processes. It was founded not only as a place of prayer, but also as a center for education. The Muslim world considers Al-Azhar to be one of the oldest universities in the world, founded 100 years before the earliest European university. The Fatimids also founded Dar al-Ilm, the House of Knowledge, with its large public library in which the study of the Quran and the Hadith, went hand in hand with humanistic studies, philosophy, and astronomy. This medieval library contained some 200,000 volumes and manuscripts in different languages. At the time, it rivaled the libraries of Baghdad or Constantinople. Unfortunately, it has not survived. Its collection ended up dispersed and destroyed.
Unfortunately, there was a terrible famine in the middle of the reign of Al-Mustansir in the middle of the 11th century. And because there wasn't money to pay the troops, they helped themselves to the contents of the treasury. And unfortunately, the library, along with many other treasures, were dispersed. Gold objects were melted down. So we only have the records of those from the historical manuscripts, not the actual artifacts.
If the House of Knowledge had been preserved, we would know many more things today about the golden age of this civilization, which between the 10th and the 12th centuries gave us such extraordinary sages as Ibn al-Haytham, discoverer of light refraction on the lens of the human eye, who settled in Cairo in the 11th century. The Fatimids constituted a minority. They displayed a broad tolerance of other minorities during their rule, including Christians and Jews, who were not only allowed to practice their religion, but also managed to attain important social positions.
Now, tolerance itself is relatively a modern term, and it relates somehow to our idea in the modern period of religion being a personal issue and a private affair. We can remark upon is that, on the one hand, non-Muslims under Fatimid rule were not heavily persecuted, and that the Fatimids do not seem to have had a concerted policy of converting their populations to Islam or to Shia Islam in particular. Now, this also led them, perhaps, to appoint several important non-Muslim figures and authorities in position of authority. So that was relatively unusual in comparison to other Muslim rulers at the time, under whose rule usually non-Muslims faced a glass ceiling. There was a limit to how far they could be promoted in the administration and in government.
Cairo was a cosmopolitan city that attracted immigrants from throughout the world. The largest commercial center between the East and West. Anything could be found in its bazaars. Mats from Alexandria and Basra, turbans from Spain and Sicily, ropes from Baghdad, Armenian rugs, Chinese ceramics, scented soaps from Tunisia, steel swords from Damascus, Byzantine brocades, pearls from Muscat, and rubies from Ceylon, and 26 varieties of linen made locally. The production of fabrics, goldsmithing, pottery, wood carving, and decorative elements attained a high level during this time. Interiors were clad with inlaid wood and arabesque decorated stucco. And domestic items showed ivory inlays or fine mother-of-pearl detail. The art of metalwork and rock crystal carving became extraordinarily refined. More than 1,000 years have passed, but the alleys of old Cairo still offer many unique products in a traditional atmosphere that recalls its medieval past. And inside the modest houses of the historic city, there are still workshops for dyeing yarn and many other artisan workshops that have survived the passing of the centuries. The number of craftsmen in Cairo multiplied during the golden age of the Fatimids, leading to the production of exceptional pieces of jewelry, glassware, carpentry, leather, and metalwork that were exported further afield than Egypt. The products created today in these small Cairo workshops are on display in traditional and tourist markets such as Khan al-Khalili, still a faint echo of the fame they enjoyed centuries ago.
We have the testimony, for instance, of an Iranian traveller, Nasiri Khusrau, who wrote a very famous book of travel, a Safar-e-Nameh, in which he describes the condition of the country during the reign of Al-Hakam. And he says, for instance, that the city was so prosperous, the people were so honest, that when everybody went to Friday prayers, the merchants didn't even bother locking up their shops. Such was the security in the city that everybody felt quite at ease. And he describes the city as being extremely wealthy, with every kind of commodity possible being found in the bazaars and the souks in Cairo.
The gold dinars minted by the Fatimids reached every corner of the Mediterranean. While most European cities were living in dark or wretched conditions, Cairo saw a life of luxury, with gold, silver, marble, pearls and diamonds. Things occurred then that surprise us today. Bankers issued promissory notes and offered loans. Traders sold goods on credit. And doctors made patients sign waivers that protected them against claims after surgery. These facts are known thanks to the vast number of handwritten documents found in the 19th century inside a special storage room called Geniza within the Ben Ezra synagogue, one of the most famous in the world ever since the discovery of these documents. More than 400,000 fragments from the 9th to the 19th centuries were found. All were sold abroad to collectors and foreigners and have been studied by scholars ever since. They were written in Hebrew, but also in Arabic, Latin, Aramaic, and many other languages, and they recount the details of the daily life of a prosperous, surprisingly cosmopolitan society. Cairo was connected to Al-Andalus, Samarkand and Yemen, and even to the coastlines of Malabar and Ceylon through family and commercial ties.
So this gives us an idea of how, at least for a good number of people, Fatimid rule brought a flourishing economy and society. And we see the signs of this even in some of the very exquisite products that survive, very few, but very exquisite products that survive of the court. And we also see elements from daily life in the excavations of Fustat, and we hear echoes of this in the documents in the Geniza. To a considerable extent, it was a period of success.
But after 200 years of splendor, during which Cairo grew to become the largest city in the Muslim world, the Fatimid Shiite dynasty collapsed in 1171, submerged in political conspiracies and the effects of a 7-year drought that led to hunger and despair. A Kurdish soldier called Salah ad-Din and the last of the Fatimid viziers gradually took over and eventually put an end to Fatimid rule. Salah ad-Din named himself Sultan and established a new dynasty of vassal governments of the Baghdad Caliphate, imprisoning or executing the Fatimid court and prohibiting Shiite policies and practices. The new authorities attempted to erase the memory of the previous rulers, even prohibiting any visits to the tombs of Muslim historical figures, a very widespread trend at the time. Only a few of these tombs are preserved today in Cairo, such as the mausoleum of Sayyida Ruqayya, which contains extraordinary muqarnas and inscriptions from the Quran, written in Arabic Kufic script. The new ruler, Salah ad-Din, wanted to display his power, so he commissioned the construction of a new royal residence, the Citadel, a symbol of this new era. More layers of history have accumulated in Cairo since the collapse of the Fatimid regime until today, such as the subsequent eras of the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, or the Ottomans. These make up a spectacular Islamic heritage that can be seen throughout the entire Old City, as well as in Darb al-Ahmar, a neighborhood built in the 12th century on the land stretching between Cairo and Al-Fustat. Cairo has a vast Islamic past. The oldest mosques that remain standing, such as the 9th century Ibn Tulun, display a combination of materials and styles from different periods. Each political, religious and artistic period has left its imprint, as in this exceptional decorative work from the Fatimid era.
What is very interesting is how the Fatimid art and architecture has taken from previous decorations like Byzantine and Coptic and created its own forms and its own designs. Cairo, a foundation by the Fatimids, continued to exist through the Ayyubid period, through the Mamluk period, and now it's a mixture of all these architecture that blend together within this city.
Delving into the past of Cairo overwhelms the imagination. Cairo is like a fantastic volume of stories gathered over centuries about men and women, rich and poor, the weak and the powerful, locals and foreigners, all adding to a uniquely fascinating and complex historic narrative. To this day, people of all ages are still sitting in front of the mosque of Al-Hakim. This monumental building was built over a period of 23 years by the Fatimids. Construction work was started by the Imam Khalif al-Aziz and completed by his son, the Imam Khalif al-Hakim. 10 centuries later, the mosque was abandoned and in complete disrepair until a first restoration process in 1980. Since then, it is once again being used and admired by its neighbors. Few cities in the world can boast of housing the heritage of so many civilizations. This powerful legacy can also still be seen in extraordinary buildings such as the Mosque of Al-Azhar, which has welcomed religious worship and teaching since its foundation to this day, but also many other artistic expressions, customs and traditions. The Fatimid dynasty, one of the most splendid ever known in the Muslim world, made a large contribution to this legacy.